I see a lot of theories out there as to why the ACC would be interested in bringing in Utah, but let's cut through the BS.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch each and every day. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode, we will talk about how the ACC football programs are going to be getting paid through EA Sports College Football, which I can't wait for, by the way. We'll talk about how ACC programs are going to have to handle the House settlement because the budget's going to go up, revenue sharing, other expenses, how they're set to handle it. A couple of strange comments made by the SEC Commissioner and how that can tie back to the ACC, but I want to talk about this Utah situation. By the way, he's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. And so one of the things, Kenton, I keep seeing these theories from college football fans as to why the ACC would be interested in adding Utah. And I keep seeing people talk about, they want to make this desperation move, move to try to keep Florida State happy, to try to keep Clemson happy. Maybe they'll drop the lawsuits if the ACC adds Utah. Kenton, that theory, it's one of the most idiotic things I've ever seen. Like, I'm pulling no punches on this. One of the most idiotic things I've ever seen. The fact that people can't understand that wanting to add a great athletic program like Utah, who apparently, we'll talk a little bit more about it, apparently isn't happy with their, about to start Big 12 membership. Can't that be a mutually exclusive thing from what's going on? Florida State wants to leave. They probably will leave at some point. Clemson wants to leave. They probably will leave at some point. Adding a program like Utah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a desperation move to make FSU and Clemson happy. It might just be something that helps your conference regardless.
Utah has won 2 Power 5 conference championships in very recent history. How recent history? I was already bald by the time they won their first one, and that's a fairly recent development for me. So the reality is Utah is a wonderful brand. And by the way, I need our listeners to recognize this, first-time listeners. Alex Donno is one of the most positive people I have ever met in my life. For Donno to take off the kid-safe gloves with you all is saying something right now, because it is very idiotic that this is a ploy to appease one or two of these teams that are thinking about leaving. This is objectively good for the conference. Whether or not Florida State leave, whether or not they stay, whatever happens, if you ask me, is adding Utah to the mix a good deal? Yes. The answer doesn't change. So why are we throwing out all of these speculative things instead of the obvious? Sometimes the obvious is the only answer there is. Like, what are we? I know that a lot of you probably watched Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr. and you want to reach for the outlandish theory to start with. But as he once said, once you eliminate the impossible, the only thing you're left with is what? The possible. The very possible in this situation is what? Hey, the ACC sees a good brand, a quality brand, a brand that's a championship winner, a brand that has done great things in the very recent past, and they want to add that to their mix since we've already added teams that are further west than them. Like, what are we doing here? It's nonsense, and I promise you, Florida State fans, you are important. You're special little boys and girls. You're amazing people. You all are not the center of the universe, okay? There are things happening in the world that are adjacent to you, that are not directly targeted at or because of you. A la the shirts running out at the ACC championship, a la adding in Utah, a la Clemson's lawsuit. These things are, again, they're around you, they're related to you, but all of these things are not 100%. Hey, this is strictly to get at. This is strictly to hurt. This is strictly to copy Florida State.
Right. Well, and another way to look at it, rather than looking at it as like a ploy to try to appease Florida State, because personally, I feel like that ship has sailed. I
Yeah.
don't think Florida State, like their athletic director Michael Alford, their board of trustees, they're not going to wake up one morning and say, "Gosh, you know what? Forget about it. All the millions of dollars we've already spent on our
Hmm.
lawyers, and we're all of our fighting of the grant. We're just going to forget about that. We're going to sing kumbaya, live happily ever after." Like, no, I don't think there's any appeasing. Same thing with Clemson. But at the bottom line, assuming the ACC within the next few years is going to lose huge brand like Florida State and a very big brand like Clemson, Utah, not saying it's a direct replacement for either of those programs, but it would soften the blow and it would help the ACC survive, because the ACC does plan on, or at least trying to survive beyond Florida State and Clemson inevitably leaving the conference. Now, the other interesting part about it, Kenton, is the flip side that I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea that that Utah, they're about to join the Big 12, why they would already be looking for a different destination, like why that is happening. And some light was shed on this by Luke Fletcher of Rambling Roundup, he's been all over this Utah story. He says on his X account, he says, "I was told the reason why Utah chose the Big 12 in the first place is because they were told they would get 42 million all in from Big 12 membership. They would only get 25 million from the ACC, as they would take the same reduced share that Stanford and Cal received. At the recent ACC spring meetings, though, members were briefed that they could get up to an extra 50 million per year, up to 50 million. So there are different levels of that via the new Success Incentive Initiative. So Stanford and Cal could get 25 million in a down year, or up to 75 million if they win the ACC football championship and other metrics. Utah is very interested in ACC membership, he writes, going forward, from what I am told. So it sounds like the incentives, Kenton, whereas 25 million is the floor, but it sounds to me like Utah, if this is all true, is thinking about betting on themselves, that, hey, we think we can do better than like the bare minimum, which is probably if you have like a 4-8, 5-7 type of season. Utah, I'm sure they value their program, saying, hey, yeah, you've got 42 million from the Big 12, which is take it or leave it, versus the ACC, there are incentives. So that maybe would explain why they would be interested in looking at another destination.
Well, well, well. Look at how the turns table. I'm looking at you, Dracomus Brockmeyer Toll. I'm looking at you because you were eyeing all of these ACC teams. You told us that Pitt fits over here nice. NC State fits over here real nice. You were ready. You were like the vulture swirling overhead, watching an animal take its last few steps. That's what you thought. But look at that. Ain't no fun when the rabbit got the gun. All of a sudden, teams who believe in themselves that say, you know what? I think we can win the ACC. I think we got a shot. What do you say, boys? They've got the chance to not only make adequate or on par or on pace with what Big 12 teams are making, they have the chance to whoop the wheels off them. I'll tell you what, that sounds great if I'm Utah. That sounds great. If I'm Utah and I believe we have a championship brand, not because we were in a weak Pac-12, we have a championship brand because we are a championship brand. We breed excellence. That is our standard. That is what we believe we do day in, day out. And everything we do, excellence is bred. Championships are bred. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take that opportunity. Because if somebody would have told us back at Cass saying, hey, we're going to give you the opportunity to make more money in this league than what you're making in Detroit Public Schools, but you got to win a championship, we would have like, sign us up. Where we got to sign under that line? We would have been foaming at the mouth and salivating, just getting excited, even imagining the opportunity that a championship equals more money. Granted, it's high school football. We didn't get paid, but You get what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Like that would have been the deal. So, I think that Utah potentially betting on themselves is very impressive here. The only thing I do have questions about, how do you work your way out of the Big 12 contract? Because you had to sign a contract. Well, okay, I know that this wasn't, kicks and giggles.
I was having a conversation about this with a friend of mine who follows realignment pretty closely, and he reminded me that, years back, TCU was about to join the Big East right before the Big East blew up, and that before they joined, they were able to pay like a reduced buyout to get out without ever joining it. So since I don't know, since Utah's not like they're not officially in yet in the Big 12, I'm assuming they must have signed some kind of paperwork.
Yeah.
Maybe they can negotiate a reduced buyout without actually having become a member, because there is precedent for that. Although every conference contract is different, and I'm assuming that whatever contract they signed with the Big 12 is different than whatever TCU had signed with the Big East years ago. But I'm figuring there probably would have to be a negotiation of some sort of a relatively small buyout. But I'm with you, because that's been a sticking point for me. It's like, how do you get out of there when you're just about to get in?
Yeah. It's a strange situation, and I'm very interested in seeing this because we're seeing all of these lawsuits happen with the ACC. But I wouldn't be surprised if, we saw Texas A&M pay their way out of the Big 12 cleanly. But I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see an upcoming legal battle between Utah and the Big 12, because again, I would hope not. I would hope it doesn't end up in a legal battle, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens, based on, number one, how litigious of a country we are. Number two, the fact that they may not agree on the numbers that should come out here. Because like you said, you and I both know this ain't handshakes and rainbows. The alliance was handshakes and rainbows, and we saw how that worked out, right? It was, the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12, we're all in this together. We're not going to hurt each other. Last time I checked, USC, Oregon, UCLA. What conference did they end up in, Donno? Oh, and Washington. What conference did they end up in?
The Big Ten.
Oh, so you're telling me that the alliance that was built on handshakes and hugs and feelings didn't hold up very well? Interesting.
Well, if you're talking about handshake alliances, how do you think Jaden Rashada feels about that handshake deal that he had for that $13.85 million in NIL at Florida?
He said he got a recording. Billy may be cooked. Billy may be more cooked than a well-done steak. I'm talking about that well-done $2 steak that you got to chew for about 30 minutes before you get it done. That one, yeah.
We got a lot more to get to on this episode of Locked On ACC, including where ACC football programs rank in the EA Sports payout structure. These schools are going to be getting paid for the new college football game. I want to talk about how the budgeting is going to work for the House versus NCAA settlement. But coming up next, there were some interesting comments made this week by Greg Sankey, the SEC Commissioner. One of these comments is just downright puzzling. The other actually makes a lot of sense. We'll break it all down right here on Locked On ACC. You want to keep it locked. And I already know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. Folks, it is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. We're down to the conference finals. You want to get action on these? Yes, you do. FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. I'm looking at the NBA action for Tuesday night. Dallas Mavericks, can they get the sweep? They're 2-point favorites tonight. Do you like Dallas -2? Do you like Minnesota +2? I think Dallas probably wraps that baby up at home tonight. Florida Panthers are going to try to even things up with the New York Rangers in the Stanley Cup Eastern Conference Finals. Panthers are favored by 1.5 goals. They're money line favorites tonight. So you want to get all this and more action at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Yeah, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Locked On ACC, he's Kenton Gibbs. I am Alex Donno. So, Kenton, a couple of interesting comments from Greg Sankey of the SEC with their spring meetings about to start.
When is he not giving interesting comments, that one?
Yeah, so, okay. So, obviously, there's so much talk about the near future for college sports, right? I mean, with the House settlement, it's probably going to pass, and you're going to have revenue sharing coming up. People are talking about possible collective bargaining down the road. So Sankey commented on collective bargaining, and gave one of the more ridiculous quotes I've seen. He was asked about collectively bargaining with athletes, which he says would require employment. And then he said, quote, I've not had a student athlete come to me and say, quote, I want to be taxed like an employee. Couple things here, Sankey. Number one, you do understand NIL earnings, 1099 earnings. I know a lot about those. You also have to pay taxes on those, Sankey.
Yeah.
No, it's not as if the payments that players are getting, because college athletes are getting paid. They're getting paid through NIL. They're going to be getting paid through revenue sharing in a couple of years. Like, okay, are they not already paying that? I want to be taxed like an employee. No one's ever said that to him. Okay, then the other part of it is, how many student athletes around America do you think are walking up to conference commissioners and saying, Mr. Commissioner, I want to be taxed like an employee? Like, it's one of the more ridiculous quotes I've ever seen, Kenton.
Let's take it a step further. I played college football for 3 years, right? I never walked up to the conference commissioner once and said a word to that man.
Right.
Like, with all due respect, that's just not something that happens. Players just aren't walking up to conference commissioner. Hey, man, Swafford, we're so grateful for the job you've been doing here. Hey, Jim Phillips, we really appreciate you for coming on down to the ACC. We know you had such a cushy job at Northwestern, and you coming down. We don't do that. Athletes don't walk up to commissioners, period. So that's the first order of business here. Second of all, it's interesting to see how out of touch some of these guys are, because like you said, these guys are getting taxed. These girls are getting taxed. These men are getting taxed. The reality is, even if you are a student athlete, even if you are in college, there's a threshold for the amount of money that you can make before Uncle Sam says, too much for a student. I need a gram out the bag, please. That's how that works, right? So I don't really understand that. And even beyond that, I'll go a little bit further. Right now, the players are individuals. You cannot collective bargain with individuals. That is how a lot of corruption happens. That's how a lot of if we just pay this player $3 million, he'll tell all of his teammates, no, we don't need to get together and unionize. We're all happy here. We're all friends here. Like, the collective bargaining is supposed to happen when a group unionizes, or when a group has a formal representation, a formal front, even if you don't want to call it union. I know that word scares some people, but when you have a group
what about
people,
guild? Is guild a less scary word?
There we go. If there was a athletics guild per se, and they were coming to the table to the SEC, then you would be hearing about whether or not people would like to be taxed as employees. But saying that is like me saying, I've never heard Donno's son say that he doesn't want to learn math anymore. Of course I haven't. I don't talk to your kid about how much he likes or doesn't like math. Of course I'm not going to know what he wants to do in terms of calculus in a few years.
That's well said. Now, Sankey said something else that I can get into this a little bit, Kenton. He said that on the agenda at the SEC spring meetings, it would include discussions over mandatory football injury reports. Now, if that were to happen in the SEC, wouldn't necessarily happen in the ACC Big Ten. I think that's something that could be regulated conference by conference. But Kent, I got to tell you, man, I'm into this injury report idea, and it's not just I'm not just saying this as someone who loves FanDuel. And if you get injury clarity, right, it puts you in a better position to win your wagers on Saturdays. But just the way that I look at it, and this is something that Miami keeps very secretive, because they don't have to. Like, they don't have to tell you, who's injured. They don't have to put out an injury report. So why would you if you're not obligated to do that? And it's something that a lot of college programs keep that very close to the vest. It puts fans in a position where you don't necessarily understand who's going to play this week. What condition is my team in? Obviously, it puts gamblers in a tough position. And, with the amount of influence now coming from sports books, and with the fact that, as we talked about for so many reasons, college sports, especially college football, are trending, to basically becoming professional leagues. I would not mind mandatory injury reports, right? I mean, I know you want to respect the privacy of your student athletes. I'm not necessarily needing to see his x-rays or his MRIs, but if you can tell me who's questionable, who's doubtful, who's out, who's in, something like that, I don't think that would be a bad thing.
Here's the crazy thing. Donno, I'm sure that you've been doing this sports radio, sports talk thing since well before when we considered, gamblers as degenerates and like, oh my God, like they're the worst in society. Like we can't have these gamblers running around all willy-nilly. And the world has changed. As the Beatles said, the times they are a-changing. That's what's happening.
Bob Dylan, actually.
I'm sorry, Bob Dylan. I'm not a huge folk music guy, but yes, as Bob Dylan said, the times they are a-changing. And so the reality is, we talk about sports betting on here. We're sponsored by, our checks are partially paid by people who do sports betting. The reality is sports betting is becoming a huge and ubiquitous part of American society. So with that being said, there have to be certain ways to capitulate to that crowd. There have to be certain ways to level out the playing field, because without it, there will always be people who get the information. There will always be people who get the information. The question is the information readily available to the entire general public, or is it available only to the select insiders that make sports betting their job, to where they're like, oh yeah, I know that he's going to go under 26 points this game because even though he averages 30, we know, I heard from the trainer that he's got a hamstring that's almost ready to fall off the bone, like one of those turkey leg cut joints. Like, oh yeah, he's not going to do it. Everybody should have that information so that they can make the most informed decision possible. Not just the people who, we're imagining them sitting there in the basement smoking their cigarettes saying, oh man, I know exactly what the bet's going to be because I've talked to this reporter from here, that reporter from there, and I know who's going to do what. It's not exactly fair or right. So I believe in transparency in that information as far as injuries go. So Sankey is right on this one. And as they say, a broken clock is right how often? Twice a day. You got your once a day. We'd like to see another one, Gregory.
Well, we still have more to get to on this episode of Locked On ACC, including where EA Sports ranks football programs within the ACC, because they're going to be doing their payouts for the new college football video game are going to be based on a tiered structure on where they rank these programs, how they rank them, where the ACC stacks up. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. So, Kenton, I don't want to bore people with spreadsheets before we get to this ESPN, this EA Sports thing, I should say. But we do have some info on athletic department budgets, because remember, once this House settlement comes fully into effect, which may not happen until 2025 at the earliest, estimates say every FBS university, especially Power 4, I guess, because they're the ones who have the revenue sharing, are going to have to budget $30+ million per season with new expenses, revenue sharing and other fees and expenses for these payouts. And so, I guess in the ACC, the programs that are in the best position to do that, Notre Dame, this new 30 million plus would account for about 14.7% of their athletic budget. I got to say, Stanford's budget must be in pretty good shape, their balance sheet, because they're next in line at 16.7%, Clemson 17.2%, Florida State 17.4%, Miami 18.8%. You go down, I guess SMU is in the worst. They must have the lowest athletic budget because it would be about 35% of their budget. But, I have to wonder, these athletic programs, are they going to be able to find a lot of creative ways to raise new revenue, or are there going to be some cuts when it comes to non-revenue sports? Suddenly, you might be using used tennis rackets or used golf clubs. Like there's going to have to be some cuts made somewhere if you don't bring in all that private equity, of course.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be completely honest and transparent in saying that I was wrong. I was wrong about the way that this distribution was going to work from these settlements. I thought the NCAA was giving these teams a shot in the arm out of their own coffers to say like, hey, here's your money, do with it as you please. But instead it's just like, hey, universities, y'all have to come up with the money to pay these players. So I was wrong there. I was very wrong there. I was misinformed. I will admit that. So I don't want to hear anybody say, does this Kenton guy ever admit he's wrong? It just happened. Mark it down on your calendars. But now, with that being said, I do look at this and I say to myself, damn, how is a school like SMU going to survive this? Yeah. 35% is like, that's not for those of you who think like, oh, 35% is a small amount. Imagine if not all of your bills, just your two biggest bills went up by 30%. Just imagine. What would you do? The two most expensive expenses in your life went up by 30%. You would be devastated 9 times out of 10. Unless you were already well on, and see, that alarm was letting me know that the financial alarm bells would be sent off in your life if everything increased by 33%. But that's what we're looking at here in terms of, that's a serious big deal for them. Even the schools where it's only 20% or 18%, it's like, that's a jump. That's a jump. And with no shot in the arm from the NCAA, with nobody subsidizing that and them having to pull it from their school budgets, I'll say this. A lot of these schools have massive endowments where they can like figure out some creative calculus to kind of work things out and eat that cost.
I mean, you might have to make and you might have to increase your athletic department budget by taking money away from something else. Maybe we don't need to build that new student union this year, right? Something like that.
Yes, and that to me would be a sin and a shame, because I'm a firm believer in, while athletics are a big deal, while college athletics are professional, they're still collegiate. And so more than whether or not they're professional, one thing that I believe is college athletics should feed the university, not bankrupt it. College athletics should always push money in. And the minute that college athletics starts to take so much out that you start to see a decrease in housing quality, that you see a decrease in staff quality, that you see a decrease in educational quality, that's where I have a problem, because the other students didn't necessarily sign up for that. And that's not fair to them, in my opinion.
No, that's well said. Now, for something a little bit more fun, the new EA Sports college football game is going to be coming out on July 19th. And, as we've talked about, maybe we haven't talked about it on this show, but as it's been known for a couple months, each individual football player, which is separate from what we're about to talk about, but every football player who opted into the game, most of them did. Arch Manning was a notable exception. Most players opted into the game. Those who opted in are each receive $600 and a copy of the game. So no one's getting rich off of this, but they're getting, $600 for their name, image, and likeness, free copy of the game for a console of their choice. Now, separate from the football player payouts, universities who participate in the game, all 134 FBS schools participating in the game, are going to receive payouts, and they're going to be given out based on tiers. Tier 1, they're going to receive just under $100,000, $99,875 for every Tier 1 university. Tier 2, $59,925. Tier 3, $39,950. Tier 4, which makes up, a lot of group of 5 and non-power schools will make a little under $10,000. Now I think this is pretty fair, Kenton, the way that they decided this. Mm-hmm. It's all based on the final AP poll rankings for each school for the past decade. So they're splitting this up as fair as possible. Now, the only ACC school that shows up in Tier 1, or at least, full-time ACC member, is Clemson. Shows up in Tier 1. Obviously, they've won within the last 10 years a pair of national championships, which certainly helps that. Notre Dame also shows up in there, along with Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Georgia, LSU, Michigan, Oregon, Oklahoma State snuck into Tier 1 somehow. Iowa snuck into Tier 1, Penn State, and Utah. So maybe we'll have another ACC school in there. But, so I guess the question is, Clemson is in that Tier 1 for how much longer, though, Kenton? Are they going to be able to stay at the top of that mountain?
I think they can, but again, they have to adapt. They have to adapt. Yeah. If you do not adapt, if you do not evolve with the times, you will get left behind. As my good friend Alex Donno reminded me earlier in this episode, Bob Dylan said it best: the times are changing. Get with it. Please, I'm begging you. I'm saying this to Dabo Swinney, not because I'm a huge Clemson fan or hater. I'm a fan of teams in the ACC being good, and I don't care if you're about to leave the ACC. While you're here, I want you to be good. Get your ass in that portal and do something. Do something. Yeah. Go fill those holes. So if they don't begin to use it at some point in time, they're cooked. They're done for. They're not you're not really looking at a feasible path forward. But if they decide to combine their excellent high school recruiting and player development with a sprinkle of portal when, hey, we've done all we can to develop this young man, it's just not working out. We can go get this player who can do what he does just a little bit better. I think it's time we go do so. I think, they're going to be just fine. But if not, at tier 1 status is, hey, the national championships, I'm sure will keep you there for some time. And once the gas of those run out, it's not going to end up well.
The other prominent ACC programs wound up in tier 2. I don't know who Florida State can sue for being tier 2, not tier 1, but FSU that does come in despite recent success. They come in at tier 2. So let's see, Miami, Louisville is tier 2, Pitt tier 2. Remember they won the conference a couple years ago. I know last year was not a good year for them. Virginia Tech, UNC. I think. Where is NC State?
We are also tier 2 now. I was waiting for you to get to NC State.
Okay.
I was waiting for you to get to NC State now.
I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to troll you. Like I was legitimately looking for, because I figured they were probably in tier 2. Okay, so NC State.
No, it's all right. You took the long way around. That's all right. I'll tell you this. I look at these tiers, and I very simply say this to all the teams: you do not have to stay where you are. Nobody. You talk about Clemson not potentially being a perennial tier 1 school. Duke right now is in tier 4. Duke does not have to stay in tier 4.
Yeah.
They don't have to stay in tier 4.
Yeah.
Cal is in tier 4. If they think about what Cal was during their heyday, we're talking about EA's football game and, college football. Do you remember who was on that cover for Cal? Deshaun Jackson. That was a thing that happened. You know who was at Cal around that same time? Aaron Rodgers. You know who else was at Cal around that time? Marshawn Lynch. Like, there are plenty of guys who can say that they're Cal Bears that did special things there, that went on to be very special players. The goal for all of these schools, regardless of what your tier is, if you're not tier 1, I'm going to compete, I'm going to fight, I'm going to battle, we're going to win on the couch, or in the couch, or rather, on the couch at people's homes. We're going to win on the recruiting trail. We're going to win in the portal. We're going to win in workouts. All you have to do is win to move up in these rankings. And that's what I say so much for all of these teams. None of you are permanently set where you are. Virginia Tech, you're not set. UVA, you're not set. UNC, as much as I don't like the Dirty Foot Club, you're not stuck perennially as a tier 2. Everybody can move up or down. It's all about what you do. And I have a suspicion that plenty of these ACC teams will be moving up very shortly.
You know who's always tier 1? The everydayers. You guys are tier 1 for making Locked On ACC your first listen each and every day. We will talk to you guys again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.